Go ahead and get the recorder started. So again, good evening. I'm Randy Kearns, and this is another edition of HCM3020, and we're going to go over components related to cybersecurity tonight. Again, in the context of healthcare informatics and healthcare technology, one of the largest challenges we deal with at times includes how we keep our information safe. And I have to confess, one of the primary challenges we have in trying to keep our information safe also includes the fact that many of the systems that we use today in the healthcare world were designed really with the intent of taking care of patients. Many of those systems weren't designed with the concern and absolutely the sincere concern that some of those technologies are susceptible to being hacked. Anyway, let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And just to be clear, the screen that you're seeing is the cybersecurity and ransomware screen. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, I'm going to assume it is. Let me go ahead and move on. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move on. So our defining law that really oversees how we protect information still goes back to HIPAA. As a reminder, HIPAA came about in 1996, well before many of the technologies we have today. HIPAA was also updated during high-tech in 2009, also under the context of how we better protect your personal health information. I do want to talk a little bit about ransomware tonight, malware, cybersecurity, denial of service, which is really the easiest way to attack a system. I've got so this presentation has a lot of slides. Obviously, we're not going to spend the time that it takes to go over all of the slides, but I do want to be sure and hit some of the more specific parts that we'll cover tonight. Office of Civil Rights, again, the OCR we've talked about before, came about during the Bush administration, was substantially stood up, funded, and created during the Obama administration. And again, from a health information technology, when we talk about high tech, and actually when I talk about OCR became a prominent office during the creation of HITECH. And HITECH stands for Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health. Social engineering and phishing, we want to talk about ways that people can attempt to hack your system. What are things that you can do that are pretty simple, again, to protect the system that you're going to wind up working in at some point in your life. The value of, and for that matter, the challenges associated with social media. We'll talk a little bit about that. Phone scams are less of a problem. I mean, they're certainly a problem, but they're less of a problem in terms of how we deal with that in the healthcare world. And then insider threat. I'll talk a little bit about insider threat in just a minute. Meaningful use, again, we've talked about this before, came about during high-tech. PII, again, PII is something that we have to, PII and PHI. PHI was first identified during HIPAA, but the whole point again is what are personally identifiable fields of information and how do we protect that, and then what's a breach, and we'll also talk about what's a reportable breach. I did include a couple of short videos. Actually, let me flip to that So let me change let me stop sharing this screen and then share. Let me figure out, let's see, where is my, no, that's not what I should. Hang on just a minute. Let me find this course and it should be here. And let me go down to, while I'm here, let me be sure and note that I've got a number of links included in the course this week. I would ask that you take a look at each of those. And then I also, although I've not made the link active for next week's assignments, which includes digital twin and other trends in emerging technologies, but I did make the final assignment active for the week of November 30th. Again, just as a reminder, we have one more class and it's on the 25th. It's, again, taught the same way as this one is. I realize some of you may already have started your Thanksgiving festivities. I'll do the same thing for it that I've done for the rest of these classes, and that's recorded. And sometimes it takes a day between the time I do the recording and the time I'm able to make it active for you. But I'll certainly do my best to be sure that's active for you next Thursday morning. And then let me go back to.
Professor Kern.
Yes.
Next week, I see you have a final paper on there. Is that for our class? Because I thought we weren't doing a final paper because we did the class, the others, like the certification class.
Let me go back and look at the syllabus. I thought we had a final paper due, but that's a good question. Let me go back and look at the syllabus, and I'll get back to you. It won't be tonight, but I'll post an announcement on that after class is over. Is that okay?
Yes, because I saw it on there, but if you look at Moodle, like the beginning of Moodle, it says that because we're doing a $50 certification, you are waiving the final paper. That's why I'm asking.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that as well.
Okay, well, if you all remember that, then nix the final paper. What I've made active, I'll go back in and take it down later tonight, and that will not be necessary. Okay, is that fair?
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So things that I want to, the real challenge that I want to be sure that you understand in terms of cybersecurity this week is also to understand the fact that I would love to tell you that everybody that you will deal with in your life has good intentions, and their intentions are to say who they are, do what they say, and mean it. There's actually a movie on Netflix now. It's called The Laundromat. It's actually based on a true story, but when you wonder about shell companies and how people can be deceptive, The Laundromat is really a bit of a frightening story, but also, again, reminds us just how things that seem to be real may not always be as real as they seem. I'll play the clip on it real quick, and then we'll move on. There's another clip I want to show you. Well, I say I'll play the clip. Yeah, here we go.
First, you must ask yourself, are you wealthy? The secret truth of the world is that in most games, someone to win, someone has to lose. Think of fairy tale that actually happened. There's confusion over who has to pay.
So they drowned Joe and 20 other innocent people, and somebody's making money from it.
Well, it goes back to this law firm, Mossack Fonseca.
So what happens next? What do we do next?
Try and send money.
It's a scam that goes from Houston to the West Indies to some bank, who knows where.
They're getting away with murder. Which is bad. It is such a big word for being such a small word.
How does it all work? Bribery, corruption, money laundering, millions and millions and millions of dollars. Somebody has to sound the alarm.
Is my money.
Most of the time, we don't even know.
Anyway, I will tell you it's a what I believe is a great insight into sometimes what really appears to be real is not quite as real as it should be. I think it's based on a true story with a lot of true facts that were woven into this particular movie. And if you have access to Netflix, I think it would be worth your moment, worth a few minutes of your time. This other is a really old movie clip. It's from the 1980s, as you can tell by the technology that they're using. But again, when we talk about insider threats, just remember there's always someone who has access to sophisticated computer equipment and coding to the extent that they can honestly do some interesting things within your system. And this is a comedian who died several years ago. His name is Richard Pryor. And this is actually in a movie, one of the original Superman movies. But let me play this short clip just to give you a little bit of insight into how people can, again, do things that are to benefit themselves that certainly aren't legal. Obviously, this was back at a time that people got paychecks.
First paycheck? First rip off, man. It's supposed to get $225 a week, right? This says $143.80. How am I supposed to live on that? State tax, federal tax, Social Security tax. Right, so you're still getting some money when you hit 65. So get money when I hit 65. I'm right now. I can enjoy it while I'm young. I can get down. Boogie. Boogie.
Actually, it's probably more like $143.80 and one half. There are always fractions left over in big corporations, but they round it down to the lowest whole number.
What am I supposed to do with half a cent by a third of a mile? Everybody loses those fractions.
They don't exactly lose them. You can't lose what you never got.
And what happens to all those half cents? The company gets it?
No, not really. They can't be bothered to collect a half cent from your paycheck any more than you could.
And what happens to them?
No, they're just floating around out there. The computer's nowhere. How many sugars?
1.5.
Just quick time, Gus. You coming?
Yeah. No, actually, I've got some stuff to finish up, so.
Working overtime, huh? What you doing, buddy? Looking for a raise?
Yeah. Looking for a raise. Another week, another check. So, Chairman, another one for me. I put in a voucher for expenses. Yeah. You know.
Simpson? Well, come what now? Just the 85 now goodbye. Keep on paying the teacher's salary until he thinks up more ways to shake the money tree. He's bound to step up sooner or later. Why? I don't know. That's what they always say in the movies. He won't slip up at all. No, not at all. He'll keep on quietly taking the breath from our mouths. He'll keep a low profile and it won't do a thing to call attention to himself. Unless, of course, he is a complete and utter moron.
Okay, so anyway, hang on just a minute. Let's go back to sharing screen 2. So my whole point to showing a couple of those, again, is just to give you a little bit of insight into there are ways that people can manipulate systems to certainly to be to their benefit. And a part of people manipulating systems, again, a part of people manipulating systems includes how they, it certainly requires a certain amount of insight or access, but if they have that type of access and they have those types of skills, you know, is either of those scenarios real? Well, I've already told you the first scenario is actually based on true facts. It's based on a true story, and it does give you an idea of how people use shell companies to move money around, to the extent that sometimes it's very difficult to determine exactly where the actual money is located. And again, as we look through some of the terms and certainly some of the technology security components, it's certainly important to for us to think about the impact, the considerations that need to be there. Before we go any further, let me be sure and mention just a couple of things about well, let me go back to, okay. Now, just a couple of a brief overview about some of the basic anatomy for hardware. When you think about a computer, remember there's a motherboard and a processor. The processor is basically the channel of how information flows through the computer. Best way to think about memory and hard drive is if you have a file cabinet. The file cabinet, how much storage do you have? How much room do you have to keep files? And then as you open a file, how much room do you have on your desktop to open and spread files out so that you can see them all at the same time? Hard drive is storage. How much of a file cabinet do you have for storage? And memory is that desktop short-term storage. What do you have available, that desktop space that you can spread things out so that you can see it all at the same time? The monitor is only there just so that it gives you instant feedback so that you can immediately see what you're doing. A lot of people like to use multiple monitors depending on what your processes are. As an example, I have 4 monitors in front of me now. And then output is how we're sharing information. We typically share information either electronically. Occasionally we print something off. As an example, earlier today I had to print something off, sign it, scan it, and then send the electronic version. But they did not want an electronic signature. They wanted an actual signature on a scanned document. I don't know why. That's just some of their rules. And then software anatomy, think about, you've got to have some type of a operating system. The operating system, actually I don't have that on here, but you have to have an operating system. The most common operating system for a Windows-based machine is obviously Microsoft Windows. Microsoft Windows version 10 is what a lot of people use. Or if you have a Macintosh-based machine or an Apple-based machine, then it has its own proprietary operating system. And then you've got different types of software that you use. If you're on the internet, you have to have some type of an internet browser. The most common internet browser is Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, which at one point was Internet Explorer. And then Mozilla Firefox and Google Chrome are also 2 that are quite common. Again, if you're in the Apple world, you're using Safari. Word processors, really the only word processor most anybody uses today is Microsoft Word, although Google Docs and WordPerfect is still out there to some extent. Spreadsheets, Excel, presentation, PowerPoint, and an email manager. And the reason I mention that is, again, if we go back 30 years in time, Microsoft didn't have a browser. In fact, it was not until the mid-1990s before Microsoft had any of these products other than an operating system. And that was because Microsoft basically took the visual interaction that you saw in a Macintosh and took what was called DOS, the disk operating system from IBM, and turned it into an image-driven type software. And that's what really gave us Microsoft Windows. The early version was 2.3 and then 3.1. And then anyway, that's kind of the evolution of it. The real challenge that we have, though, is if I look back on documents that I created electronically 25 years ago, I would struggle to be able to pull the document up if I had stored it on the medium that we would have stored it on in those days. Would have probably been a 3.5-inch floppy disk. If you go back a few more years, it'd have been a 5.25-inch floppy disk or an 8.5-inch floppy disk. And so the technology, as the technology has changed in a pretty dramatic way, there are scholars that talk about this may wind up being a blackout period 500 years from now, because we didn't write a lot down. We certainly didn't store it in such a permanent way that, we're certain that, 500 years from now, they'll be able to retrieve some of the data that we've stored on a hard drive in 2009 or 2019. But again, just if we go back 30 years and look at the software that we commonly used, so first of all, if I had an internet connection in 1995, more than likely I used an internet browser called Netscape, which was all the rage at that time. if I had a word processor, the most common word processor I used was WordPerfect. My spreadsheet was Lotus. My presentation software was Harvard Graphics. And so it just reminds you how software, just like cell phones, have changed in a pretty dramatic way. If I go back 25 years ago, the most common, the cell phone everybody was dying to have was called a BlackBerry. In fact, to the extent that it was commonly referred to as Crackberry, everyone had to have it. And it's that slow evolution of change where they didn't adapt to the change in technology and keep up. But it's also important to keep those things in mind as we're thinking about vulnerabilities to the software as well. And then connecting to the internet, again, these are the steps. You've got to have a device. The device flows through a router and a local area network that has to connect through some type of regulated connection. It's called the user side of the last mile. The most regulated connections are through like AT&T or Cox or some of the cable companies. And then the internet exchange points, the IXP backbone is outside of that last mile. That's kind of the system itself. Just understand that there are organizations that regulate its use, but no one really owns the internet, so to speak. Other terms, something called internet protocol, we commonly refer to that as the IP address. When you allow sites to accept cookies, and most sites require you to accept cookies, you're actually giving them permission to, and they can identify what IP address you connected from. And again, for most people, that's just a series of numbers or random characters, but just understand that IP address has typically a physical location that you connected to. And cookies are those things that give us bits of information. You know, if you're looking for something on Amazon and then you close out that tab, and then you go to Facebook and you're looking at something with friends or Instagram or Twitter, and suddenly you see a recommendation to buy something that you was just looking at on Amazon, that's not, that's by design. That's certainly the way that they've used your information to remind you, oh, by the way, you didn't buy that earlier. If you want to go back to Amazon and buy that, that would be a great thing, because if you click through their ad, they'll get click value out of that, which is typically a penny or half a penny. But you do that obviously millions of times, and suddenly that's real money. Let me kind of skip over some of this stuff. One piece I do want to talk about is something called a web crawler. If we think about search engines, how do search engines know web pages are out there? And the way they know that is something called a web crawler. You know, if I use Grammarly or I use Turnitin, how does that software know that somebody wrote a paper like that and posted it somewhere on the internet, you know, a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago? How does that software know that? And the answer is they use a web crawling type system that literally looks at trillions of bytes of information and stores it in a searchable fashion so that a search engine can find it, so that, you know, if I'm looking at your paper, or hopefully you're looking at your paper first, you can see where there's somebody else published a paper that's very similar to yours, and what those similarities are and how those similarities link back. Again, all of this is based on a series of things: a web crawl system, a storage system, a high-speed search of that information that's been crawled, and then some type of algorithm that's been written to help the computer develop some artificial intelligence, so that when you ask for something, it can give you some strong recommendations that are pretty similar to what you want it to be. Anyway, I hope you understand. The web crawl is really that essential fashion in how so much is done today in search engines. And although I talk about Google as one example, primarily because Google is the largest search engine in the world. But just understand, like some of the other technologies I just mentioned, Google hasn't existed, at least as a publicly traded company, for more than 20 years. In fact, if you invested in Google 20 years ago and you invested $10,000, it would be worth more than $10 million today. But again, it gives you an idea of how exponentially technology has changed. There were a number of other companies, if you'd invested $10,000 in them in the year 2000, you would have the paper that they gave you in exchange for the $10,000, and that's it. So there's, as was mentioned earlier, when there's winners, there's also losers. There are a number of legal authorities that help us understand cybersecurity and help us stay protected in terms of laws, presidential directives through executive order, homeland security. But just understand, as much as we're working, as much as the good guys are working to try and protect this information, just understand that there are a host of people out there who are looking for new ways to access the information inappropriately and in some cases illegally. It's also important to understand the difference between something called the surface web, or the web that we routinely see, the World Wide Web, so to speak. And then there's something called the dark web, or the deep web. And there's a difference between the deep web and the dark web. So the surface web is what's routinely searchable. It's what web crawls dig through all the time. And search engines are constantly looking at that. This is a good graphical representation. This is another way to, again, to help sort out the difference between the surface web, the deep web, and the dark web. The deep web, the best way to think about the deep web is tax information that's related to, if I wanted to look at the tax information and all of the different things related to the plot of land that I own, where my house sits on, that's in the tax base at Orleans Parish. But that's not something you can find through a search engine through the surface web. It's a part of the deep web. And the deeper you get into government databases or libraries, again, there's huge amounts of information, but it's not routinely searched as a part of what's called the World Wide Web. Just understand there's also a piece that's there called the dark web that actually requires different types of specific browsers to be able to access the network. If you don't know what it is, it's probably safest that you don't know what it is. If you do know what it is, I'm glad you do. I just hope you're one of the good guys who knows something about it. Just understand the dark web is typically there for people who don't want their activities known. There's a lot of anonymity associated with the use of the dark web. And so there are a number of good things that happen on the dark web, but there are an awful lot of rather sinister things that take place on the dark web. I've included a couple of definitions of cybersecurity, but the main thing is to understand all of the ways that people can protect a system, ranging from software to hardware to physical access. There are a lot of different ways people will try to access information, again, depending on how much they want the information and what they want to do with the information. It's sad to say that information related to healthcare actually has a value on the market. And so there is some interest in trying to acquire illegally significant amounts of healthcare information, particularly personal healthcare information. What else do I want to be sure and talk about? The patient portals and the telemedicine and medical devices. So again, there's this explosion of this information, but the challenge is, how do we protect it? How do we keep it safe? And how do we make it in such a way that the only person that can access your information is your information? And part of the challenge, again, gets back to people doing bad things for bad reasons. And we'll start out with social engineering. Who's trying to hack into systems? Who's trying to penetrate systems? I didn't include it in this, but there's a very old movie. Oh, it just left my brain. Matthew Broderick plays in it. Anyway, it'll come to me in a minute. But he is what some would refer to as not necessarily a bad guy hacker, but someone who is curious. And again, whether it's a black hat or a white hat or someone who's naturally curious, just to understand hacking into systems that you're not being paid to hack into. A white hat hacker is typically paid to hack into systems, but you don't develop that skill set by always being a good guy in most cases. Anyway, but in terms of who are the hackers and what are they trying to do, the whole aim is to try to penetrate the defense system of a computer network so that they can see the information that's there. There's an enormous amount of hacking attempt that's going on right now in the last several months. Why do you think that is? Because if billions and literally hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent trying to find a cure for COVID, why wouldn't it be easier to spend a couple of $1 million on a black hat hacker who can hack the databases of some of these research institutions and take a lot of shortcuts and go ahead and find what they're exploring right now as potential solutions for a COVID vaccine. And that's just one of many examples of why people are trying to hack into systems, and also why it's so important to protect these systems and lock these systems down. And I've also included different types of teams that are again trying to either trying to protect a system or trying to hack into a system. Let's see. And these are some of the more common categories that hackers fall into. Again, what are they trying to do? How much are they being paid to do? There's also another movie called Swordfish. Actually, the movie I was trying to think of earlier was War Games. But Swordfish is also another one of those movies that highlight the skill set of a hacker and what he can do and what the value of his skill set is. Without me telling you about the movie, the whole point is, what is the value of the skill set of a hacker? And that's why good guys want to pay hackers to get them to try and break into their system to help them, again, identify vulnerabilities and break them down. I'll also add that if you find a vulnerability to an operating system, or you find a vulnerability to a piece of software, in most every case, there's a scalable reward from that software company for finding a vulnerability and reporting it to them. In some cases, the reward can be substantial in terms of a cash reward. So all of that gets back to these software companies want to be sure that they're providing absolute 100% security, but there's just no way to do it. If you think about all of the different types of systems they have to make the software work with, it's very difficult for them to anticipate all of the different types of arrangements or configurations for the computer hardware. And so what they wind up doing is they wind up creating inadvertently some vulnerabilities to their software. There's also thousands, and in most cases millions, of lines of code, and it's just not always 100% fail-proof. Let's see. There's a group called Anons, which is certainly a hacktivist group. They're probably the most well-known. They have a tendency of using what's called denial of service attacks, and that's what they'll wind up doing. Is they'll wind up using in most cases, some type of malware to infect a number of devices. Several years ago, they came up with something that would infect a lot of things that were related to, that were connected to the internet through something called the Internet of Things. A number of kind of dumb devices, such as cameras or refrigerators, things that have an internet connection but have a really simple function. And that really simple function, if I have a Samsung refrigerator and I've got a touchpad screen that allows me to select and send myself a note on what groceries I need from my refrigerator, just understand there's not a lot of robust computer processing power that's been put into that computer, and there's not a lot of security measures that's been put into the software, because who's going to hack a refrigerator, right? Well, if I'm trying to redirect the refrigerator to point its signal somewhere else, and I'm trying to now control thousands of these devices to point their signal at one location, what I wind up doing is I wind up crashing that location because it can't handle all of the service requests at the same time. And what that does is it takes the system down. It's a pretty simple way to do it, but it takes the system down through what's called denial of service. Anyway, that's the most common way that they can attack a system. When Bank of America has particularly done something that the Anons disagree with, they're one of the more common targets for denial of service. But I've seen a number of different sites that wound up being attacked through a DDoS approach. Cyber attacks, number one cause of data breaches. 90% who were involved in this study said that they had had a data breach in the last 2 years. Healthcare industry became the number one target of cyber threats and cyber attacks in 2017, and it continues to be that case today. We are a target. If we work in the healthcare world, we are a target. Understand the different ways. I've kind of broken it down into malware, ransomware, and social engineering. Malware is any, and there's a lot of different names, and I've got a slide that kind of highlights that. But the whole point of malware is to insert some type of small piece of computer code on your computer. I want to do it on your computer so that it looks rather harmless, but the intent is for me to potentially bring your computer into the network and help me do something with it. An example is there's a group of geeks would be the best way to put it, but there's a group of people who are, when you were at some point in life, you were in a math class and someone said, your teacher said, what do the numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, what do those numbers have in common? And for the sake of time, I'm sure somebody is thinking to themselves, that's a prime number. And you're right, that is a prime number. Well, how many prime numbers are there? Well, the reality is there are an infinite number of prime numbers because there's an infinite number of number combinations. Well, what if you wanted to be the person that discovered a prime number? Wouldn't that be, I don't know, kind of interesting? Well, how can you discover a prime number if it's 18 numbers long? I mean, I just quoted to you the prime numbers that I recall from 40 years ago, 50 years ago in school. But what if I mean, again, as I said, the prime numbers are infinite. So how do you discover a prime number that has, 9 places in front of the decimal point? And the answer is you use a supercomputer, and you write a small script and implant it in malware and infect a number of other computers so that it runs that sequence in the background. And now suddenly I command 12, 15, 20, 75, 100 computers to help me find the next prime number, because I want to be the person who discovered a prime number. And, it's just excess computing capacity that you're not using anyway. Most desktop computers, certainly most network computers, aren't using their full capacity. And so sometimes that's what people have used malware for. That's just a small example, but just understand that's an example that's out there. If you want to search for, you'll find where a number of different large supercomputers actually found that series running in the background on their supercomputer, to the extent that several people had infected their supercomputer and they realized the malware was there. Ransomware is typically a lot more challenging, where it locks down a system. The healthcare system I worked for 15 years ago had a ransomware attack, and it started rather simply. Somebody arrived at a meeting a little bit earlier than they had planned. They pulled out their laptop, they connected to the healthcare system's Wi-Fi, and they went on to Yahoo Mail, and they downloaded a piece of email that had a ransomware virus that was a part of it. They clicked on it, and when they clicked on it, it triggered an activation that infected not only their laptop computer, but it also infected the network and got into both the server and the mirrored server that was located on site. So much so that it took all of their billing software offline for the next 2 weeks. To think about this in perspective, they're about a $750 million a year healthcare system. To be a $750 million a year healthcare system means that you're billing about $2 million a day. And if you take that system offline, that means that's $14 million that you can't bill for at the moment while somebody's fixing all of the computers in the background. That doesn't include all of the other functions that may have been affected by this particular server. Now, again, all servers are not networked together in such a way that, I could crash the EHR, and I could crash the billing software, and I could crash the human resources software. In most cases, there's firewalls built so that I can't crash the entire system. And in this particular case, it only affected about 30% of their system, but it did infect the billing component of their system, and wreaked havoc in their healthcare system for several weeks. Other pieces are social engineering. It's different ways to manipulate people so that they divulge confidential information. A part of that with social engineering is, if you think about some of the things that you list on your profile, and then you think about security questions. You know, what was your mother's maiden name? Well, depending on how much genealogy somebody may have included in their profile on Facebook, it may be pretty easy for me to find someone's mother's maiden name. What about your high school mascot? Well, if you show me what high school you graduated from, I can track down the high school mascot associated with the high school you graduated from. So there's social engineering is really about me being a bit of a detective and trying to identify the information socially that you may have put out there through various sources, that as I string those pieces together, I can be you and recreate your profile, and from that apply for credit cards, change the address on your bank account. Anyway, let's look at malware just a minute. Let's look at these three highlights. So these are different types of names of malicious software that we commonly refer to as malware. They have slightly different meanings, and they have slightly different associations. And I have slides for those. We're not going to go over them, certainly not tonight, but that's a part of the presentation. Let me kind of move through this stuff. I do want to talk about ransomware just a minute. Ransomware is, and the most common ransomware is a Trojan known as WannaCry. And with WannaCry, what it does is it installs an encryption software on your hard drive, on your data, and they basically, whoever has installed that will then ask you for non-traceable currency, which is typically Bitcoin or some type of funding in that fashion. But the whole point is to get you to pay a ransom, and if you pay me the ransom, I'll give you the key to unlock the ransomware. I will tell you, it's common practice that healthcare systems and cities don't pay the ransom, but I will say some of them do pay the ransom. In most cases, when they pay the ransom, they do wind up getting some type of an encryption key so that they can unlock their software. So they're about 50% effective if they pay the ransom. And in most cases, the ransom is not a lot of money. It may be $50,000 or $100,000. But just understand, the first time you pay that is a signal that you're willing to pay. And so if they can get you again, the next time they're going to ask for substantially more money and substantially more money. It really becomes a very difficult situation to deal with. Let me again kind of skip through some of this stuff. This is a good example of a denial of service attack. And I've got ransomware here. Again, just to understand, ransomware is the most common threat to the healthcare world today. And again, with ransomware, they're going to use some type of cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin. And this is what your screen will look like. This is a screen grab from somebody who whose system was encrypted with a ransomware technology. And then it's got a countdown timer. And what the countdown timer does is it also reminds you that at the end of the countdown timer, it's going to start an erasure process where it goes from locking your files to wiping your files. again, as you can imagine, that it puts a lot of pressure on someone to make a decision. Do we pay the ransom, or do we crash the system and hope we've got backups from earlier that we can restore from? Even if you back up from yesterday, how much billing did you do over the last 24 hours, or how much scheduling did you do over the last week that you're going to have to recreate? And then social engineering attack. How do you social engineer, and then how do you prevent that type of information from being lost? Again, key pieces: keep your laptop close. Be sure you've got good passwords that protect it. Don't use your computer in a way that other people can see what you're doing, particularly to be able to see your password. Don't ever share your password, and don't use simple passwords. I use a lot of simple words for my passwords, but then I exchange codes for letters. As an example, if I use the word apple, I may use the ampersand sign, a capital P, a small p, a number 1 instead of an L, and maybe a 5 instead of an E. But the whole point is, what are ways that you can still remember the password, but you can interchange some of these other pieces to help you create the password. Let me see if there's anything else I want to be sure and cover tonight. We're wrapping up. We're getting to the end of our time. Again, insider damage, some of the best examples of insider damage, Chelsea Bradley, or Bradley Manning, as he was known at the time, collected a lot of information for WikiLeaks that he shared with WikiLeaks. Edward Snowden released a host of hacking tools that quite honestly has led to some of the WannaCry attacks. And this particular, the Panama Papers, is actually the story that was told in the movie called The Laundryman. I do have some insider examples. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, very strong passwords, again, is the ultimate solution that includes a series of characters and numbers. Also, if you have two-factor authentication as an option, be sure and select that. Be sure and have good malware protection. Be sure and have good antivirus software. Kaspersky is banned in the US on government computers. Understand Kaspersky is a Russian-made software. Kaspersky will tell you that they have no affiliation with the Russian government, but again, for rather obvious reasons, that software is banned on US government computers. What else do we need to be sure and cover tonight? So I had a couple of questions that FBI quote, healthcare providers typically do not use the same high levels of security technology as companies in other industries. And that's probably a good way to close this up. Just understand that most of our technology was designed not to keep people out. It was designed to make it simple so that your 75-year-old grandmother could access her patient health record or personal health record. It was not designed because somebody in North Korea may want to hack her information, acquire it, and bundle it and sell it on the dark web. You know, that may include her bank account information or her health records. Again, most technology, certainly healthcare technology, was not designed with that level of safety. And so, although new systems are being designed in that fashion, there's so many old systems, legacy systems that are still out there. I do want to answer a couple of questions that I've received during class, and then at that point I'll open it up if anybody else has a question. in terms of when you will be able to review your final grade, the only thing that I'm behind on grading right now is the forum grades, and understand if you were late doing a forum grade, I can't give you credit for attendance. Remember, the forum response needs to occur during the week of the class. For you to get credit for attendance during the week of the class, you had to have posted the forum answer and your original writing during the week of the class. So that's the only thing that may be out there. I'll go back and check, but my aim is to have that cleaned up. But that's the only thing I know of that's hanging out there that I've got that's outstanding. And then there was another question about class next week. Yes, we do have class next week. I've not turned that segment on yet because I'm still working on the PowerPoint. There's a technology called digital twin, and that will be certainly other new technologies. That's the information that I've used before. I'll use that again next week. But the other piece that I'm working on that I want to also include in next week's assignments is something called digital twin. If you don't know what that is and you want to work ahead, you can go ahead and look that up. But just understand, as digital twin moves into the healthcare world, it has some really interesting possibilities to it. But again, that's something that we're seeing beginning to emerge in the healthcare world, and that is digital twins. And there was a question about Norton security. So whether it's Norton or McAfee, or do you use the Microsoft has a firewall and a browser security. I actually on one of my computers I have Norton, and on another one I have McAfee. And the reason I do is I got a free member subscription with one when I bought one computer, and with the other one when I bought the other computer. I can't tell you one tells me I feel better with it than the other. I will tell you this. Another piece that I use is something called Malwarebytes, and the whole point is the browser security doesn't always give you the protection against malware the way a separate malware protection system operates. And so I use both a browser security in either Norton or McAfee, and then I also use a malware software, and then also understand Windows has a firewall protection as well. And then I would always be sure, and if you have two-factor authentication, it's a little bit of a pain to get a text message with a code to activate something, but I can't tell you enough the importance of that, particularly if you're dealing with your money. The other piece is, it hasn't happened to me, but it has happened to a couple of friends of mine where their personal information was stolen through a hack. Certainly no fault of their own, but they use that information to file their tax returns. And if I'm paying taxes, sometimes it seems to me to be counterintuitive that somebody would want to hack my file and then file my taxes. It's like, okay, well, if you want to pay my taxes, you're welcome to do it. But the other thing that I learned that I didn't realize was the IRS doesn't immediately verify either what you owe or what you should be refunded. And sometimes, if instead of you owing $5,000, you file it in a way that you're showing you should get a $10,000 refund, they get the refund, and you're left with your tax file locked up, and you can't file your taxes, and you're left trying to explain who took the $10,000. Now, in both cases, at least friends that I know of that wound up losing money or wound up getting tied up in that particular situation. In both cases, they wound up being able to file their taxes later. But one guy was waiting on the refund to do some work on his house. Obviously, that didn't happen for about 6 months. Another person was delayed filing her taxes for almost a year. So I will tell you, social engineering in a way to collect your information and to hack your account is certainly out there. You can take all the steps necessary to try and protect yourself. But when they talk about clicking on links, be very careful about that. Hover over the email address that's been sent to you. And despite what you may read, what you see in the hovered, what's peeled away, the underlying account could certainly be nefarious. It could certainly be from, and certainly if the money winds up, if you wind up losing money that goes offshore, it's a lot more difficult to recover that than if it's somebody within the U.S. At this point, I'm 7 minutes over. I have tried to answer all of the questions that have come in. Are there any other questions? If you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to turn on your mic and ask a question now. One comment I want to make about the CSBI certification. Again, several of you passed, and I'm happy for you. Several of you came very close to passing, and I would tell you the same thing I mentioned earlier. You know, when I worked as a paramedic, there was a certain national standard test that we took that was really, really hard, and we finally, the best way we could get people to take the test was just to remind them it's a 2-part test. You take the first part to realize what you need to study the second time, so that the second time you take it, it's easier to pass. If you weren't successful passing it the first time, that's what I would tell you. In 30 days, when the opportunity avails itself for you to take the exam again, please be sure and take it. Any of these things that you can do will add to and make your resume more attractive. And that's what I would encourage you to do. Always look for ways that set you apart from other people who may be applying for the job. This certification is certainly one of those things that can help you with that. And with that, I'll say, are there any other questions? Okay, hearing none. I will see you next Wednesday night here on Zoom. And obviously, if you're already celebrating Thanksgiving, I understand that. I will have the information up for next week in the next 2 days. And I will post the video if you're not able to join us real time. Okay, thank you again, and you all have a good night.